Heavenly Father, today we put on the full armor to protect us against attack. We put on the belt of truth to protect against lies and deception. We put on the breastplate of righteousness to protect our hearts from the temptations. We put the gospel of peace on our feet to walk in your light, peace, and freedom with the Holy Spirit. We rebuke anxious thoughts. We take up your shield of faith for protection to block and destroy all the darts and threats thrown at us by the enemy. We put on the helmet of salvation to cover our minds and thoughts, reminding us that we are children of a mighty King. We are forgiven, set free, saved by the blood of Jesus. We take up the sword of the Spirit, your living word, that has the power to demolish strongholds and is sharper than any double-edged sword. We come to you, Lord, in prayer daily. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen. What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and today I'm honored to introduce you all to spiritual, sexual, and religious abuse survivor, educator, writer, and author, podcast host and podcaster, master's level university instructor, licensed professional counselor, seminar teacher, conference speaker, clinical supervisor, trauma recovery specialist, published author, trained life coach, private practice owner who works with her own clients, and an absolute inspiration, Connie Baker. A little bit about Connie's background in case you guys are new to her story. Connie was born into a family with conscientious parents that loved, supported, and cared about her. From the outside looking in, they looked like a typical normal family, but lurking beneath the surface, there was a dark side that was hidden from plain sight. Her parents were rigid, strict, authoritarian, and very harsh with Connie's discipline, and there was a great demand for absolute compliance that Connie had to learn immediately as a young child to survive. She was supported by her parents as long as she was being good, and the code word for her family was responsibility. These real strict standards led to Connie becoming a very compliant and high-achieving child and adolescent back in the 60s and 70s. She was raised in a country church in Southern Oregon that was full of unassuming and good-hearted people. And the church naturally reinforced all of the family themes that Connie had been conditioned to unconsciously accept at home. The theology and culture of this church went along to strengthen the rigid, unbending demand for the same particular behavior patterns of protection, compliance, obedience, and responsibility her parents had always expected of her. The church Connie was attending during that time also happened to be pastored by someone who, 3 years earlier, had publicly confessed to having molested his own foster daughter. And when Connie was 16, this very pastor caught her alone on 4 different occasions and kissed her on the lips. Connie was silent about this violation for years. She knew the story of this pastor's foster daughter and knew no one would take her story seriously. The sexual violation helped further normalize this type of behavior and pave the way for more abuse down the road in Connie's life at the hands of church clergy. Since then, Connie has spent over 25 years healing, recovering, and understanding the dynamics of complex trauma she had experienced. She married, became a mother, and went back to school to become a mental health specialist in order to help others who were put in the same position as her to become a victim of spiritual, religious, sexual, and complex trauma and abuse at the hands of authoritarian figures who are supposed to be protective of children and young adults. Connie has a YouTube channel under the name @ConnieA.Baker, a book called Traumatized by Religious Abuse that I highly recommend you guys all go get, and a ton of resources on her website, www.connieabaker.com, including webinars and religious abuse recovery essentials. Connie's passion is absolutely infectious, and her healing journey is nothing short of inspirational. I know you will all love her as much as I do. In Connie's own words, quote, "I now have the remarkable privilege, joyful privilege, sacred privilege of walking with those whose lives have been injured or broken at some point by spiritual abuse. May my small story and my restored happy life and being give hope, inspiration, and healing to those of you who've traveled the same path." End quote. We will be diving into some topics that don't get talked about nearly enough, such as religious and spiritual abuse. So I ask you all to please put away whatever you're doing, grab a pen and paper, and give this brave warrior woman your full attention as she shines a light on the darkness and shows us, through her inspiring and miraculous example, what is possible on the other side of healing. And before I finish introducing today's guest, I wanted to give just a couple quick reminders and updates. If you'd like to be on the podcast, share any information privately with me, or send me a written testimony for my upcoming book series, or to be written in a Substack article, you can email me at imagineabetterworld2020@gmail.com. I've also partnered with a couple of my favorite brands to get you guys a couple discount codes on some of my favorite products, including Rife Technology frequency machines and blockers, and CZTL's high-quality methylene blue. Treat yourself to holistic health at a better price with brands you can trust. All of those links and the discount codes are in the show notes, and so are all the links to how you guys can contact me on social media. I'd love your support across all platforms. Thank you all on the other side of the screen for helping to make the imagination the safest space on the internet for survivor, whistleblower, advocate, and educator disclosures. So you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming today's guest of honor, survivor, overcomer, voice for the voiceless, walking miracle, content creator, and a woman on a mission to rid the world of spiritual and religious abuse through awareness, understanding, and healing. The one, the only, Connie Baker. Connie, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Emma, I love this. It's like drum roll. I love it. I'm like, man, this person she's talking about is, wow, what's up with that? Oh, it's great to be here. Thank you for those kind words.
You're so welcome. It's funny because I actually had, and I think I told you this, I had audience members reach out to me that really wanted you on the show. And I was like, who is this Connie Baker? And I was like, how have I never heard of her? And, long story short, we connected a while ago and this has been meant to happen. And I'm so excited it finally is for my audience to get to meet you if they don't already. So I wanted to start with sharing about your childhood, your family history, and what your upbringing was like, because it led you into some very vulnerable places, even though it wasn't something where you were born into this extremely abusive family in the way that most people might think. Your family looked probably really good on the outside, and I think that it's important that we always discuss all the different ways that abuse can happen, even if it's not the intention of the parents.
Exactly. My parents were truly good-hearted. My dad's passed away. My mom's still alive. And they had a lot of integrity. They would own their mistakes. And they were super supportive of me. And like, like you said, until I stepped out of line even a little, and then it was really intense. I'm a firstborn of two firstborns. So that's like, you know, it was a really rigid situation, but it's a real mixture. My mom and dad are they were good humans, but what their mindset, encouraged by the fundamentalist church that I grew up in, was rigid. Well, I don't know how much we talk about this, but mentioning names, but they were James Dobson. Like it was a very control authoritarian mindset around that. And that prepared me to have authorities take advantage of me. So it's a mixed bag. And I know so many of the people you have on this show have just such more dramatic and horrifying stories. And mine, growing up, I look back at most of my childhood as fairly happy and semi-functional, but there was that deep, dark undercurrent of rigidity and control and authoritarianism that really prepped me for worse abuse.
What were some of the things that your parents would do that were really rigid and maybe consistent?
Yeah. There I learned fairly young that I didn't like spankings. And some of those, I have a very vivid memory. I know I was 5 years old because of where we were living, but I lied to my dad about not brushing my teeth before bed. And I remember he took off his belt and I was rolling down the hall while there were things that happened in my home that as a therapist, if I heard of them now, I'd have to call Child Protective Services. Like it was too harsh, utterly disproportionate to the offense. And this is a 5-year-old lying about brushing her teeth, really? So it had that was not all the time, but it was enough for me to develop some really strong I will be compliant and follow all the rules to keep myself safe physically as well as emotionally. And so that, that stuff like that, yes, the spankings with the belt, yeah, and just it was just an assumed you don't ever disobey. And then the church really reinforced that through my elementary school years of you just don't disobey authorities. And oh, it just set me up.
And what about your grandparents? Were they strict in the same way that your parents both were? And they sort of had a very similar upbringing and it and a very similar style as far as how they parented, or what was that like?
It's a great question. My grandparents on my mom's side, my grandpa on her was an old school Mennonite, so he was very pacifist and he was actually by temperament a very gentle person as well. My maternal grandma, she was a little more, she was fiery. But I don't think on the maternal end there was as much of that. That's a really good question. My dad had a rough history, rough growing up. His mother was a single mom and she wasn't married. This is back in the 40s, okay? Like single mom. And then he ended up at 2 or 3 years old being raised by grandparents, his mother's parents, who loved him dearly, who were so good to him. And his grandpa was a raging alcoholic who, would be violent toward his grandma. Not toward him, but toward his grandma. And so he grew up, born in the 40s. My dad I don't even know if he knew how to do the work to process some of that, but that was where my dad had a temper, and it would not often come out at us kids. But I remember wrenches being thrown across the garage when he was working on a car when he got mad. And I'm just like, it's a small child. That was jolting. So was there anything overly dramatic for the time? No, but y'all can put together the pieces there, like yikes. There was stuff going on.
And what about your parents' relationship and sort of how their roles in the family? Was your mother very passive then, since your father was really aggressive, or what was that dynamic?
That's such a great question. My mom and dad, their marriage was I would say very mixed. They fought a lot when I was young. I remember pretty nasty fights, yelling. Anyway, there were some nasty fights going on. They also somehow figured out to get to resolve. So it was this odd thing of high conflict and high resolve. And so part of the gift they gave me, just innately and intuitively in the family, the upside is I learned how to go through conflicts and talk it through and have hope for resolve and hope to try to keep the relationship intact. My mom and dad, before dad died, they were 53 years, and they definitely had ups and downs. Their relationship stabilized after that first 10, 15 years. It stabilized. There were long-term issues they had with each other that were kind of like eye roll, toward the other person sometimes. But my mom actually has kind of a core of steel, and my dad was super, for the most part, very respectful of her, interestingly. So it was a mixed bag. It was a very mixed bag. My dad was they got married at 21, and my dad was so immature. Or no, they got married at 20. I was born when they were 21. They were babies. I tease them. I say, you know what? I was raised by junior hires, and they laugh. They say, yeah, pretty much, you know. So, so they were young. So there was a mixed bag. Even I think there was actually a pretty good power balance in the relationship because my dad respected my mom, and my mom would come to a point and just be like, no. And my dad would respect that, you know. So it was there again, so much mixed.
And how are they towards your siblings? Did they treat them the same, or did that gradually loosen up as they had more children?
Oh my gosh. Such another great question, Emma. My brother is a whole different story, and this is his story, so I'm not going to be very public with it. But he was adopted from a very abusive environment when he was 4 years old, very abusive. Like almost you name it, it was going on. And so my parents adopted him. I'm 5 years older. He came to us at 16 months as a foster child. We adopted him, I think it was at 4, 3, 4, probably 4. Um, anyway, he has struggled his whole life with, and I think he'd be fine with me saying, severe mental health issues and severe addictions. And he was in prison for a while, and there's been a really, and we're actually good buddies. He's 5 years younger than me. He still struggles profoundly with mental health. He's been clean for like 5 years for the first time in his adult life. So I'm super proud of him there. Um, but his physical health is horribly deteriorated. A lot of it due to drugs, but a lot of it due to trauma. I mean, your listeners know trauma affects the body in adulthood. It's like and so he's got just massive. So that kind of blew up my mom and dad's world because they couldn't demand compliance from him. He was a wild child, and nobody understood mental health back then. This is back in the 60s, 70s, you know, well, mostly for him, the 70s. Nobody understood that. So he's been a whole story in our family. And my mom and dad, it was so painful. I mean, decades of pain around my brother. And I've told them I think it was the best thing in the world for them because they'd have been just me, they would, you know, if they'd had just me, they would have been honestly very self-righteous about their parenting. Well, see, look what good job we did. Look how Connie turned out. They would have been intolerable, honestly. And I've told them so. And they're like, you know, their later years, they're like, yep, you're right. We would have been, you know, they did grow and mature through the decades. You know, it's one of those things when my daughter was born and they started spending a lot of time with her, I was like, who are you? Because they would treat her with so much more gentleness, flexibility, wisdom, of course, than they did with me at 21. So anyway, so yes, they've done their work through the years. But yes, it's my brother is a whole different story. That was the question. Yes.
That's really amazing that they were able, and I know we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but sort of how they were able to um, come to terms with not being perfect and being able
Oh,
to admit that and be humble about your situation, you know?
yes.
It's so sad how this stuff can break families up and how the parents will alienate the kids because their egos
Yes.
or, you know, because they're under control of somebody, you know, and don't want to let other people down. So it's really incredible that you've been able to break through them so much, you know, and try to start that healing between everybody.
Yeah, my parents absolutely did the best job they could with what they understood with my brother. I think most parents do the best job they can with what they have. Not all of them, but most of them. You know, but they really tried to be conscientious parents to my brother, and they stuck with him. They never disowned him. They visited him in prison. You know, like they stuck with him. So in that way, they're very conscientious. They want to do right. They really did. Now that caused a lot of extremes as well, because right by fundamentalism is can be very damaging.
100%. And this obviously carried over into other parts of your life. And I want to talk about what school was like with having these demands. How did that impact you in school?
Well, I don't know whether you're your audience and whether you've discussed Enneagram stuff at all in this, but there is a personality, thing. I'm a 3. So threes are like high achieving, go get them. Let's just conquer this mountain, and that came through in my school. I was like, oh, I can do school well. Let's kill this thing. So, I did good in school. I did not, I look back now, I'm so grateful with what we know about the brain and trauma. My brain stayed pretty clear. I do have trauma from my childhood, no doubt, but it was not invasive like it is to people who were raised and went through much worse things. So there really was an undercurrent of support and love in the home, which was a big deal, like a big deal. So school was fun for me. Um, yeah, school was fun. I enjoyed the academics except for math. Ugh.
Oh, me
But
too.
it's
My worst subject.
yes, exactly. Well, look, I'm a therapist. There's like a tiny fraction of therapists who love math. Like it is so small, it's almost not there. So yes, besides math, I loved academics and did pretty well. I I got very focused on spiritual life in my ninth grade year, and really, I was that chick that took her Bible to school, and but I had a lot of good friends, and really really loved I had people from a lot of different social groups in high school. I was not one of the cool kids by any stretch, but I had some friends who were part of the cool kids, and I also had, I was in orchestra. Okay, I played violin. If that gives you a feel for, yeah. Anyway, so I was in orchestra, but I had great friends from a lot of different, it was a huge high school, so there was a lot of different friend groups there. But anyway, so that kind of give you a feel for school. I'm trying to think of anything else.
Yeah.
School.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think when society thinks of what an abused kid would look like, they think of like a tattered kid who, and this can happen, I'm not saying it can't, that
Oh,
goes
yeah,
to school and isn't smart, that disobeys, and that like looks like he's been abused. And I just think it was such a shock to me to learn how high achieving so many
oh,
abused kids are, because those are the kids nobody worries about in school. Because it's like, oh, they're fine. We're going to worry about the kid that's overacting in class or or getting an F on his test, not the A+ student who's varsity
right,
soccer team. And
right.
you know, it's really incredible. And you're an example of that. So that was why I wanted you to share.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's a very interesting thing because it can go either way. I mean, the overachieving to the underachieving, depending on how that individual's brain is processing how they can keep safe in that abusive situation.
Yeah, and like I said, like those are the kids that get admired in school and are put on a pedestal kind of and treated differently, and it's like, man, it makes me look back and like think about missed opportunities to like just go ask those people if they're okay because everybody thought they were, you know.
Totally. Exactly.
So I think that's interesting too that you ended up getting into spirituality so early, but I know that that was a part of your upbringing, a big part of it, and I wanted you to share a little bit about religion and spirituality and how that manifested in your home and kind of what that was like outside of your home. Were you guys religious going to church, and how kind of was that set up within your family dynamic?
Yeah, family and church were so important to me. Church was felt like my extended family. I did have extended family, I had grandparents. I had grandparents pretty long into my life. So I had grandparents, a couple uncles that were involved. So I had extended family around. But the people who feel most like cousins to me, my parents had a group of people that they hung with, 4 couples who were very close. Those kids feel more like my cousins, in terms of the history and all the time spent with them. So church, and these were all in church. This, group was in church. And church itself, I loved it. I thrived. Here, I turned 60 this year, and I am turning into such an introvert over the last decade or two. I'm like, yeah. And partly because of being a therapist, I'm like, my mental, relational capacities have been spent a lot at work. But I was an extrovert as a little kid. I was like, whoa, get to go to church. Yay. I mean, you know, so family, spirituality, again, I was high achieving in church. I think I was 5 when I got up in front of the whole church and recited Psalm 1, the whole chapter. Like, I just did it. I didn't even occur to like, well, yeah, okay, sure, I'll memorize it. And so everybody was like, oh, Connie's such a good girl. Churches where I was uh, yeah, kind of put to the like, she is a good girl, she's going to go somewhere. And I was a pretty normal elementary school kid doing, knew all the songs, learned all my memory verses, knew all the Bible stories, was actually really interested in the Bible. Later developed some in adulthood, some Old Testament curriculum. I very, very into it. So I come into high school, and I didn't think this probably consciously, but I thought, who are the evangelical superstars? They are the missionaries. Ah, I'm going to be a missionary, which I love. Cross-cultural thought. Anthropology has always been an interest, even since high school for me. Like, oh, this is all these cultural differences. I love this. That's what they do. So that really was a good fit. And I decided probably my sophomore year in high school that I was going to go to Bible school at a Bible school in Portland, which was 300 miles north in Oregon. I lived in Southern Oregon, and Portland's in the northern part. I went to a Bible school there that a lot of the pastors I knew had gone through. And so I thought, I'm going there. And so I went to Bible school. And so, yes, so my high school years, I'd read my Bible in the mornings, I'd pray in the mornings. I was just they're again checking off all the boxes. And that was not insincere. I really did want a connection with God. And and in my fundamentalist churches, I wanted a good theology, like a right theology was the big deal, so I would study and read anyway. So that was kind of, and family, mom and dad were involved in everything in church. Like my dad, especially. Oh my gosh, he was a goer and a doer. My mom kind of was a little bit more introverted, like taking these, but she'd lead Bible studies, be involved with, da 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 da. She was still real involved. And my dad was a deacon and elder. Mom, I think he was Sunday school superintendent when I was young. Mom was always involved in Bible study stuff, leading, attending. So it was just part of the family culture. Like it's just what you did. It was our people. It was our home. I mean, like we were there 2, 3, 4 times a week, depending on the season. So it was just an immersion. I went to a public high school, which I think was really great for me. It defined me in those early years spiritually to not have to have everybody think I was cool. So that's kind of through high school, those formative years. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah. Thank you so much for answering that. I know that that was a big part of your life,
It was.
and I think too, I was listening as you were sharing about how you really excelled in at church too. And it seems like at school you might not have felt a scene, because you said that you didn't consider yourself to be one of like a super popular kid.
Right.
And so you go
Right.
to church and you're being acknowledged there, like you had that uh
Totally.
acknowledgement there to where it's like, here's where you're shining, Connie. Like this is your
Oh, it was my place to shine. I went between my sophomore and junior year, I went on teen missions. So at that point in Oregon, I don't even remember how I found out about this. I don't even remember how. I can't even remember how, but in 1980, I spent a whole summer in Honduras, Central America, with Teen Missions. Now, I know probably on the East Coast, well, it was a big deal. I mean, there was already a pretty big organization, but man, in Oregon, in rural Southern Oregon, nobody knew about that. I'm like, I'm going. This sounds awesome. And I was very adventurous and very like, you bet, let's do this. And that just popped everybody's opinion. Wow, Connie is destined for great things spiritually. So, yeah. And which now they don't know the rest of my story yet, but this is all part of the trauma with what I went through in the abuse at 25. So it's like it's building and building. And maybe I can fill in the blanks even for college. Is that okay?
Absolutely, yeah.
So everybody says, Connie, you are a big fish in a little pond. When you go to that Bible school, you're going to be a little fish in a big pond. And I'm like, okay, I'm ready for that. We're good. I became the big fish in the bigger pond. I became one of the big fish. And, I was involved. I was going places. I was in leadership and, I became an RA, blah, 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 and so went through Bible school and just kept excelling, and this is not to brag. It's actually to set up the fall. I was who's who in college. I was, all kinds of leadership, well known. And my senior year in college, I started going to a church that I fell in love with, just loved it. And so I started getting really involved there. I knew in the Portland and Northwest, I knew so much of who's who. Well, I knew who's who in evangelicalism, all inside and out at that point. I was reading books. I used to read, okay, this will tell you what a nerd I was. I read James Dobson's Dare to Discipline. These are parenting books, for those of you who don't. Dare to Discipline and Hide and Seek when I was 11 years old. Like, I was a nerd. I was like, oh, this is so
Wow.
interesting. This parenting advice is so interesting. And I would just, I didn't become a therapist. I couldn't help myself. Anyway, but that, I knew the authors. I'd already read in high school a bunch of the adult spiritual life theology books that people were reading. I was really at the center of evangelicalism.
Oh my gosh, you're like a prodigy child. Just go, 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 go. And you can still see that in your personality today. I was just telling you before we got on, like, I love that everything that gets thrown in your path just gets blasted away. You're like, nope, not taking me down. I'm gonna keep going.
Oh, and there were a few years I thought it would take me down. So yes, that's it. I've got a few decades of distance from it at this point, but yes.
Well, I think one of the things that your story showcases is how something that's intended to be good can be used in a really bad and toxic and abusive way if the wrong person manipulates those good things.
Yes.
And I wanted to start digging into sort of when the abuse started and give sort of the context. I had mentioned in the intro, you were at a church where a pastor was sort of a known pedophile, even admitted it and is still in a leadership position, which,
Yes.
there was sort of a cocktail that led to you then being the victim of abuse.
Yes. Yes. And back to high school, that was during my high school years where I was going to that church and I was 15 or 16. I don't remember exactly, but I know it was 15 or 16. And in retrospect, I know my parents would have believed me because they were really concerned that this pastor came back after. And there again, this is 78 when stuff blew up at the church that he'd molested his foster daughter. I I don't know how things all came out, but my mom and dad were like, this isn't right. Something's wrong. And then 2 or 3 years later, he's back in the ministry and sexually assaults me by kissing me. And so that just honestly, it was less traumatizing and more like, oh, I don't know what to do with this. At 15 or 16, I just didn't say anything. So, you know, I just didn't say anything. I just kept going on with life, going, yeah, what's going on there? That's not right. So then I moved to Portland and I start a church there that I love. And then that's where the second story of sexual assault by a pastor plays out. Do you want me to go ahead and
Yeah,
kind
let's
of
go with
tell
that.
some of that story?
Yep.
I'm going to try to make this shorter, and then Emma, you can come back and ask me any questions. But the shorter story is I started at 19 going to this church that I just thought was amazing. And strangely, in many ways, it was. This is a church that a lot of people, it is no more. It's kind of disintegrated since then, because this was 1984 when I started. And but a lot of people say, I've never been to a church that I loved more, even when they know some of the horrible stuff that happened. So it's a really interesting situation. So I just fall in love with the church. It's got some unique things about it. One of them is they had a very unique and progressive missions philosophy. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is exactly where I want to go. So I get into the church. I sing its praises. I just think, oh my goodness, I got to know very early on a pastor there who was very influential on the pastoral team. And he was a power player, is what he was. He immediately took an interest in me. And I called him my dad in Portland for like 6 years, from 84 to 89, 90 until 1990. I was like, this is my dad in Portland. He opened doors for me to get on, for my career on the mission field. He and I talked through stuff, personal stuff. I tell him, he coached me. I called him my dad in Portland. I think we all know where this is going. It was a lot of grooming going on. And so then when I was 25, he made explicit sexual advances at me. And I didn't know what to do. I was like, what do I do? It was, I was terrified. And I also was worried about him because in the middle of this, he starts these sexual advances. And he also says, at the same time, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm just an emotional mess right now. And my own past sexual abuse is coming up and I'm just a mess and you can't leave. I've got a gun by my bed and I will kill myself if you leave. And so I, a woman raised in the church, was a raging codependent. Like, I'm responsible for everyone. I got to help everyone. And I literally, at 25 years old, one of the saddest things to me is I consciously chose, I will let my life be destroyed by him rather than risk his suicide because I can't bear the weight of that. And he knew it. He knew. He'd watched me for 6 years. They know, predators know how to leverage, well, kindness, compassion, empathy, the ability to support, the ability to rescue. All of those are actually really great characteristics. The dark side of those is codependence. And I didn't know how to not do those. And he knew that. He'd watched. So, and some of it was sincere. He was a mess. He was an alcoholic. He was drinking more and more. Well, and I started realizing this during the abuse. Well, for 9 months, this went on where I'm like, he's out of control. He's a mess, but I can't leave. I can't leave. I can't talk because he'll kill himself. And so it was it was hell. It was so horrible through those months. I finally, now what I realize is what to call it was I started getting into some pretty dissociative states. I called it I felt like my mind was splitting, is how I put it back then. And I could not reconcile the fact that there was this sexual contact with this pastor with who I was and wanted to be. And I was thinking it was my fault the whole time. Like, sexual assault does not look like somebody physically forcing themselves on you all the time. That is one level of sexual assault. But sexual assault most of the time starts with psychological. Especially if it's somebody we know, it's psychological power and control first. And he already had that with me. Then the sexual end came. So, okay, so that was a sexual assault. That was horrible. What happened after that to me is 3/4 of the trauma. The sexual assault, I give it 1/4, 25%. It was bad, like it was traumatizing. But then what happened, there's a lot of details. I'll try to make this clear and concise. I had left. I went back to Southern Oregon to get out of the abuse. Within a week or two, he writes a letter to the pastors saying, here's what's happened with Connie and I. He sends me a copy of the letter. I come 300 miles north to Portland like that day, coming back to talk to the pastoral staff. They were called elders, to talk to the elders and say, I wanted my name clear. I was like, my whole posture was, I never meant for this to happen. I'm so sorry. This is horrible. I don't know. I'm 25. I didn't know what had happened to me. And at that point, the elders, my abuser had taken off across country in a car randomly, just left on a whim, was gone for 3 or 4 weeks. So I came back and the elders are pissed and they take their anger out on me. They blame me for the assault. And I'm like, it was like the worst case scenario. I knew it might happen that way because I'd watched them do church discipline in fairly regularly. And so I also innately knew that it was patriarchal. I couldn't have put that into words, but I knew as a woman, I was screwed in that, it was all men ruled. And so then they blamed me. Then I had to give public confession in 2 services about my sin. Get up there, I was just stripped naked emotionally. It was that was telling the elders and public confession were probably the huge, just most traumatic events of my life. And then they said, this pastor and his family needs to heal. You need to move back to Southern Oregon and live with your parents. And to me, I had nothing. I hadn't lived there since I was 17. I was like my life was in Portland, everything. My college had been there, all my friends from there. At that point, I of course said yes, because I'm trying to prove to the elders that I'm repentant. I'm so sorry. Yes, I'll do anything. So I moved back to Portland. You're talking about being a beacon of hope. Yeah, those next several years where I was not a beacon of hope. I went through suicidal ideation. I went through panic attacks that I didn't even know what they were. I was deeply depressed. My identity and my reputation and my life had just had a bomb thrown in and blasted it to shreds. And I did not think I'd recover. I drove home to Southern Oregon on my 26th birthday. Worst birthday ever. So I drove home and I thought, my life is done. I have nothing. What do I have? I was heading to the mission field. That's blown sky high. I have no career. I have no reputation. I am now wearing the scarlet letter publicly, like, figuratively, but it's like everybody's like, yeah, Connie was a bit of a slut, and so there's this whole thing where my life feels ended. And I did not see hope at all for where I was going to go. So,
Oh my gosh. And that had to have just been extra devastating because you were such a high performer and like
yeah.
were used to excelling at everything. And like you said, you made your roots somewhere, and then all of a sudden your whole identity is just taken from you in a second. All your hard work gone, all the hours and years that you had invested
Years.
in that just gone, and just feeling like so alone. All those people that you
Yeah.
were there for, that you
Oh,
hustled for, just weren't,
so
you didn't
alone.
have your back.
Yeah. No, they did not. They did not. Well, and that's the subculture of an abusive system is if you question the leadership too much, if and I heard that there were some single women who actually did, like single women are lowest on the totem pole power wise in a church. Well, children maybe, but in terms of adults, there's a totem pole for power, and single women are at the bottom. And I heard that several single women came to the elders and said, "What is this? We we're dispensable?" And the answer was yes. I mean, they might not have said that, but clearly the answer is yes, you're dispensable. You're lowest on the totem pole. If something happens, you're a single woman, you're out of here. And it was just, you can't question. And you can't, in that situation, you can't say, we're standing with Connie, because then that is a violation of the whole leadership's decision. And that's just a very common, that's just standard practice in an abusive system where you can't question. So, and I knew that. I intuitively knew that I was losing everybody because I knew they couldn't champion me. They couldn't say, "What are you doing?" At least not much, or then they'd get blacklisted. So it was it was so black. It was so black for a long, long time. I didn't know what had happened to me. I didn't even know that it had been sexual abuse, let alone what spiritual abuse had been.
Oh my God.
So,
It's so devastating to hear of, and even how this guy spent all those years. Like, people think that abuse is, I think what people consider traumatic abuse is what they see in movies where it's like a random person off the streets goes and just viciously attacks somebody.
right,
They
right.
can't comprehend, society can't comprehend that one man would spend 5, 6 years
Yes.
grooming somebody before trying something on them.
Yeah.
It sounds
Oh,
insane, but it's like, think about if you're really passionate about a subject and you go to college for it. Like, there's people that spend 10 years in college to get that degree to go do what they're doing. Like, if somebody's passion is minors, or, being a pedophile or being a
yeah.
predator, and they have a certain prey that they're going after that's illegal, like, you better bet that that same drive is going to come out of them to conquer that, and to try to get
Exactly.
their way with it.
Yes. Yes. And I was 25. So the men in the church, and here's the problem, Emma, for a lot of people who go through this, these high achievers, I always say I was 25 years old, but developmentally, there were parts that were 35. I was ahead of my game. I was in leadership, and there were parts of me that were 15. I was developmentally delayed. I was sexually so naive. Like, the last boyfriend I'd had was in junior high at that point. Like, I was sexually so naive. So I'm at one level, people see me as 35 developmentally. The public sees that part of me. Internally, I'm 15 going, I'm out of my depth. I don't even know quite what's happening here. Sexually, interpersonally, I'm naive, even about life. I assume the good in people, so there's this huge setup of developmental spectrum where you're older, than your age in some really clear areas, but you're also very much younger than your age. So here I am at 25 and everybody's like, she's a grown adult. Basically the pastors are like, they did not look the fact that this man was 18 years older than me, married with multiple children. So it's like, it was considered an equal emotional affair. I'm like, of course, in retrospect, but I took all that and said, okay, yeah. I know I've done bad things. I don't even know how this happened, but I've done bad things.
Oh my gosh. And during that 9 months that he was abusing you in different ways, psychologically and sexually, and I mean every single way really, except maybe physically.
Mhm. Not
How did
physical.
that impact your life as far as, because again, you're go, 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 you're involved in all these different things. Did you show signs of abuse or did you change in any way externally that you can think of, or did you just shove it all down?
My best friends knew. I tended to be an open book. Like, I talk about my life if I'm going through a hard time. My best friends were like, what's going on? I told one friend who lived in San Diego, she was the one person on the phone I told about what was going on. No one else knew the whole time. And I knew, for one thing, I knew she'd keep it a secret or I'd never told her. We're still friends. And in years following, she's like, Connie, I feel so guilty. I feel like I should have said something. I said, no, you shouldn't have. I mean, yes, but the only reason I chose her is I knew she was incredibly confidential. It's like it had to play out like it played out. And so, no, I didn't tell my friends. So, I looked on the outside. Yes, I kept up at my work, but people closest to me were like, what is wrong? And I'm like, it's just some stuff I can't talk about. And so closest to me, they knew because I tended to be pretty open and they knew all of a sudden I just shut off and shut down. But I was still functioning. I started to function less, uh, things like missing work, which of course my hyper responsibility, that's like I'm not functioning if I miss work. Um, so it was starting to and that's part of why I left. I quit my job and went to Southern Oregon because I started realizing I can't function well, but nobody knew why I left. So,
Oh my gosh. It's just
yeah,
so traumatic, all this stuff, and it's like you really didn't have, you were put in an adult position from such a young age to have to police people around you and
yes,
use discernment and, and then also try to balance that with who do I trust, and it's so sad that all these things happen and nobody intervened for you, even when you started whistleblowing. And
yeah,
so I want to start going into sort of what happened on the other side of this event. And before that, I think you're some of the things that you're doing that are really unique is you're defining these different terms that maybe come up once in a while, but I don't think they're given enough attention, such as spiritual abuse and religious abuse.
yeah.
And I'd love to give you some time to talk about that because that's not only a big part of your childhood, it's a big part of your healing journey and your work right now. So I'd love for you to explain what these things are for people who this might be very new to.
Yes, yes. Um, yes, I do work I use the words religious abuse and spiritual abuse pretty interchangeably. Church abuse, same thing. Now I know, Emma, that you deal with SRA and other things a lot on here. And well, first of all, two people super close to me in life have gone through that. And I work with clients who have gone through that. So it's not an unfamiliar. I think for the people listening, it's going to be good for us to say, first of all, SRA is its own thing. Like it unspeakable, unspeakably horrible. Part of what I feel like my story is to say this level of destruction can happen in respectable, respected churches. This church I went to was well known in the city, and it was a leader in some ways. People would say, "Ooh, what are you doing there? That's innovative," and we'd be like, "Yeah, it is." Da 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 da. And so this was not a weird side-lighted weird church. This was a mainstream evangelical / fundamentalist church. It was respected. Like nobody was like, "Ooh, something's weird going on there." It was respected. And I think that's where my story about religious and spiritual abuse, that's why it comes out of this. So it's like, this is not just some weird cult. And that happens. I work with a lot of cult survivors, but it happens in rigid systems. So what is spiritual abuse? Spiritual abuse, how I've defined it, is where any sort of power differential, where one person has more power or an institution has more power than one person, where that power is leveraged and used, usually in the name of God, or some spiritual idea, where it's used to hurt, manipulate, silence, weaken, control, damage a person. So basically, religious abuse is where one person has more power than the other, uses that power to hurt in the name of God or the Bible or some religious thing. They bring that power and hurt the person. Does
And
that make
again,
sense?
it does, yeah. And like I said, I think, when we consider abuse, we forget like how assaulted we are in the
Mhm.
spirit and religiously. And because it's not something that we feel, it's not touching us and it doesn't leave a bruise, it can be really hard to contend with that because then
Yeah,
you gaslight yourself and say, well, am I being abused? Like they're not hitting me, they're not beating me, they're
totally.
not doing this. But understanding, and I know that that can be part of it, but there's like these very like emotional and mental abuses that happen as a result of this, like how you were groomed for 6 years
Mhm.
before somebody even tried to lay a hand on you.
Yeah,
They were abusing you like in the spirit, and trying to um basically satisfy their disgusting perversions, but
exactly. And the worst abuse was not from my sexual abuser. It was from that church leadership where they took the Bible, God, and leveraged that against me in their ignorance and arrogance, both, because I came back 7 years later when I had healed up some more. And I came back to those men and said, let's talk. And I had a 6-page document saying, here's what happens in sexual assault. And all but one of them held their ground and said, nope, we're not, nope, you were wrong. You're not taking responsibility. And so that they were arrogant and unwilling to understand that dynamic. And all except for one of them. Um, and he basically got shoved out within 2 years because he started going against the power structures in that church and questioning, saying, why are you doing that? And they didn't like it and they got him out. So, um, so shoot, where was I going? Oh, the huge damage was they stood for God in my mind, those elders. I knew what the one pastor was doing was wrong and not right, and he was a mess. That's its own, in my story, that's its own thing. The sexual assault did damage, absolutely. But what the elders, all that church leadership needed to do was say, Connie, you're 25, this guy's 43. Something is off here. We want to protect you. That's all they would have had to do. And they didn't. They, in fact, said, no, we're going to protect him and his family. We need to help them recover. You need to get out of the picture and go 300 miles away to a place you don't want to go and never wanted to go back to. Um, and Yeah. So,
And that's a real big problem in the church. And again, it's
ugh,
not criticizing every single church, every single pastor. It's just, it's a really brilliant place for a predator to hide as a
yes,
pastor or churchgoer, and
yes,
you hear about that often, how the churches will choose to protect the predator over the
yes,
victims, or somehow, settle or silence the victims
yes,
so it doesn't taint their reputations. Because there are also good people in there that have a lot riding on them if there's a predator in there that's going to ruin their reputation. Or there could be a
absolutely.
group of predators working together, and it's really sad that churches are one of the first places that survivors especially go when they're trying to heal to be safe,
Yeah,
and to think that, they have to even put, discernment and put uh, their sixth sense on, to go walk into a church and say, am I a victim here? Like, am I going to be preyed upon?
yeah,
It's really sad that that's something that we have to worry about, but it's so proliferated in the churches.
yes, yes. Hugely, hugely. And the subtle thing about this and the insidious thing is those pastors could have used scripture to justify their horrible position easily. They liked power, they liked control, and as a unit, and there were three of them that were kind of were the big power players in that group of men, and they liked power and they spiritualized it. So it sounded very spiritual what they were doing, and just right before the Lord, that this was how we were going to do this thing. And it was horrible. So that leveraging, and I was still trusting, how can this group of men be wrong? They've got to be right. They're I've trusted them with my life these last 6 years. They've made decisions about my career. I'd gone to different ones of them for counsel. How could they be wrong? And especially if they decide to say God's on their side. Like, it was a mind-blowing thing. And spiritually, that did so much more damage than even the sexual assault. Because now, where was God? And that was a decade of, and there again, it makes me so sad. Part of why I wrote my book is I'm like, I'm writing this book to me at 25 to help that 25-year-old in case there are people out there who are saying, what just happened to me? And why does it sound right? What these religious leaders are doing to me, they're making it sound justified and righteous. Why is this shattering me to the very core? That's where I wanted to, and concretely, what does this look like? Whoops. Are you hearing me okay?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, great. Just said my interconnect connection was unstable. So good. All right. So yeah, that's the devastating thing is this looks spiritual. And where's God? Nobody understood religious abuse and the dynamic back then.
Right. And I grew up Catholic, and I didn't grow up in a super abusive home like, a lot of people have, that I do interview either. But one of the things that always stood out to me was I remember that I would have friends that went to the church that had really dysfunctional parents. And in the Catholic Church, you don't get a divorce because it goes
Yes.
against God and the Bible. And I remember just like being friends with these kids who would have to go home to these horrible circumstances because the parents believed in
Yes.
church regulations and guidelines versus what's healthy for my family or me, And so again, like there's so many different ways that abuse can maneuver itself in these, I think, texts and principles that are genuinely designed to be wholesome. I think
Yeah.
you do want to find a partner that you don't have to divorce, and that you don't have to, be dating your whole life. I think that's a good thing to have some type of a commitment to somebody, but if they're abusing you,
Right.
that's not healthy to stay. And I don't think God would want that, but it's a good ideology for an abuser to take advantage of that.
Oh, absolutely. You can't. I mean, I work with domestic violence as a therapist a lot, and it's often coupled with religious abuse where the church will not support the woman because they're holding the marriage more important than her safety. And what a travesty. that's not the heart of God.
No, it's not. And so when you had your whole life come crashing down and you moved back to Southern Oregon, how did you begin your healing journey? And what was that like for you as you literally just had all these different things that meant you had your identity taken from you?
Oh, I I did not know who I was at that point. I'm like, okay, I'm the adulteress. And I knew deep down something didn't seem right. I'm like, what? This is what has happened to me? It was dark. I would equate it to stumbling it around in the dark in a dark black room filled with furniture. And you just keep tripping over it and you just keep like, whoa, what am I? Where am I? For a long time. Um, One of the incredibly sweet parts of my story in healing is 6 months after I moved home, I started dating who was the person who was to become my current husband. I've been married to him 32 years. And so only 6 months, I am like bleeding out an artery emotionally. I am a disaster. I am doing panic attacks where I am blacking out in department stores. Like that happened once. I was like, are you kidding me? I didn't even know what they were, what was going on. So I start dating him. I am a mess. Somehow he actually sees the real me in there and thinks I'm awesome. Anyway, not necessarily a pattern I would recommend start dating 6 months after you've gone through that level of horrible trauma. No, don't recommend it. Strangely, though, for me, I think it was a really beautiful thing. Um, and my husband on our second date, another thing I don't always recommend, but we were old enough that we just kind of vomited out our stories. He had his own, he'd just come out of, a marriage that was horribly traumatic, multiple unfaithfulness on her part, and just horribly traumatic for him. And so both of us were kind of in this place. So we kind of both vomited out our stories on our second date. It happened. And
I think it would
honestly,
be that way though, because then you get to know the person instead of finding that out 2 years down the road.
that's exactly what we said. We're not losing anything by getting this out right now. Like, let's just spit it out. The first thing he said to me when I told him my story, he said, that was abuse. And now my husband had also been a pastor. So there was this going on as well. And I was like, yeah, there probably were some abusive parts, huh? He said, no, that was abuse. And that was the first time anybody had just said it to me. And I was like, oh, well, there were some abusive parts, I think, because that was bad. I knew him threatening me with suicide was horrible. I knew at that age, I'm like, that is horrible to do to somebody. So I knew that there was some stuff in there, but he says, no, that was abuse. So there was a real gift in my husband, having even been a pastor, saying, no, 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 not okay. But I was silent about what I'd gone through for years with most people. There were only like 3 people besides my parents in Southern Oregon when I moved back who really knew my story, probably for a good year or two or more. So I was like very alone in this process because I felt like I was going to be labeled the slut down there too. And interesting, as the story started coming out, I would tell people who weren't a part of that church, and they were like, oh, what? That church did what to you? And it was like, okay, this is as bad as I thought it. And so there were some years in there. So I started going to counseling 4 years after this happened. I finally thought, well, no, I went to counseling right off the bat to a Christian counselor. And one of her first questions and the first thing was, what role did you play in this? How did you participate in this? And I knew at least good enough never to go back to her again. And I was just like, that didn't feel helpful, because basically she was making me take responsibility for it. So basically 4 years later, I start to another therapist who's like, oh, sexual abuse. First of all, sexual abuse. She didn't have a full scope of what spiritual abuse, what had happened there. She knew what I'd gone through was traumatic and like, wow, that's horrible. but she didn't even have language to give to that. So I went through a group. And so then 7 years later, as I've referred to, I went back to, I wrote my abuser, my sexual abuser, a letter, and I knew how to get in touch with him, send him a certified letter so I knew it got to him. And then came back and talked to the elders. And I knew that I gave them 5% chance of changing because I knew who they were. They were an arrogant bunch who dug in their heels and said, we're right. We have to be right. And there was just so little humility or teachability. But I said, I'm going to go back because before God, I need to speak my story to them. So if anybody can learn from this, they're going to. And I basically said that. I said, I'm coming back because I don't want this to happen to anyone else ever again. And they dug in their heels and said, well, you're not taking responsibility. But I'd said my piece and I was fine. I was 7 years later, and there again, it doesn't have to take this long. There are so many more resources out there for recovery now. There's online forums. There's so many books coming out about religious abuse now since mine came out in 2018. And there's just been, and I love that. It's like, good, keep talking about it. Make it a cultural conversation. There was nothing for me during those years to process. So I went back and talked to them in 7 years later. And it was just a slow, gradual heal of saying, okay, I think I'm going to make it. I think I'll survive. And then finally, I think I'm going to thrive. And I told my story publicly for the first time 9 years after the abuse. And that was a huge step. I told it to my church. My husband was actually on staff as a pastor. And I told that story 9 years later to a church of about 1,200. So that was a big deal to say, whoosh, and great support. But there again, the last time publicly I'd been talking about my life was during the abuse where I was confessing my sins. So there was, I just kept taking step by step as I was able to. And and then in 2003, I went back to school in my late 30s to become a therapist and get my master's degree, and ended up specializing, as most therapists do, in the area of their story and their life recovery. So, yeah, so that's and through the years, there was just healing and realizing, oh, I think I can thrive. That took years to feel like I could thrive. It took a few years to think I was going to actually survive, honestly. But anyway, so.
Now that you know everything you know, if you could go back to the beginning of that journey when you had all that time to process what happened to you, your life imploded, and it was a slow process because, I mean, spiritual abuse, satanic ritual abuse, those terms are still very new. In 2024, there's still so many people that have never heard of these things and like can't even fathom that they exist, So I can only imagine how difficult it was back then to be like,
Oh,
what happened to me? Where do I go? But knowing everything that you know now, what would you encourage people to do if they're sort of at that breaking point, that really low point in their life, and they're stuck just like you were?
yeah. Oh, I just had a client yesterday who who was where I was. Like everything was just the bottom was falling out. And I said to him, I said, look at me. There is hope, because and he was actually around the same age I was when everything blew up. And so it's like, it's so easy. I felt like my life was done. I said all the time, my life is done. I have no life left. I don't even know why I'm continuing to exist because I've got nothing. And now, of course, 34 years later, that's kind of hilarious, because I built I've had a good life. It's not what I expected it to be. And I've had to grieve that. It is not what I thought it was going to be in my high school and college and early adult years. It's actually better. than what I'd imagined. And I think, I found things that have hit, my gifting and my skills and my contribution at a way I'm batting much higher, so to speak, than I would have had I continued with what I thought I wanted. And so to me, the issue is there's hope, first of all. It can literally feel like your life is over. You lose social support, you lose people, you lose, the bottom falls out. Sometimes you lose your identity, people don't believe you. It's horrifying. It's a slow process, but there's hope. And what we have now are online forums that can be helpful, and realize you're not alone. I never heard of anybody who'd gone through what I'd gone through back then. And I thought, I'm alone. Totally. I wasn't. There were all kinds of people, but we didn't know that. So, and to be able to get some good books that are helpful to help you start putting language and framework to what have I just been through? And again, therapy, I don't always recommend therapy. Sometimes there have been times in my life I'm like, it's too soon for therapy. I just got to hang on and survive right now. I got cancer in my mid 40s. And I remember my friends saying, are you going to get into therapy? I'm like, no, I am just worried about the next doctor's appointment and the next treatment. No, it was too much. I was like, I can't process this. And I had some good social support, which is part of that. I didn't. But about a year later, I'm like, okay, now the trauma from what I've just gone through is hitting. I need a therapist. And so I got back into therapy, So there's a timing. I don't push people to get into therapy. But I do think, number one, having somebody be able to tell you there's hope. Number two, you're not alone. Oh, you're not alone. And abuse is so isolating of all kinds, and you're not alone, and there's resources out there to help you sort that. Those are probably the main things that really come to my mind.
And what about, I feel like you're also being somebody that was so highly involved in a church and now being on the therapeutic end. We do see that there's a lack of trauma-informed pastors and even therapists, like you said, that even know this language. So what advice would you give people too who are seeking either a church or a therapist? Are there questions that they should be asking? How do they vet that way they don't lose hope being turned down over and over again or gaslit?
Right. Well, let's start with church first. And some people don't necessarily like this, but I've seen it too often to argue with. Don't push people to re-engage church, because basically what it can do to the brain neurologically is, it's like a veteran coming home from combat in Afghanistan and you saying, hey, we're going to take a walk and we're going to walk by a firing range. It's like, no, it is damaging the brain to re-expose. Not everybody's brain. Sometimes people can re-enter church and go, oh, I needed this. This is so good. But the majority of the time, they've got to take a break. And that can mean weeks, months, or years or more. I tell people, you don't ever have to go back to church. Now, most people are like, yeah, but church was in many ways a good thing for me. They miss community. Oh my gosh, that's one of the main things. People, who have gone through stuff and are having some faith shifts and reevaluations. They're like, I don't want to go to church. I don't want to hear some of that toxic theology, but I miss community. It's like, yes, it is. Yes, I get that, And I just think, first of all, don't push people to go back. When they want to go back, have them keep track of their own body's responses, because I've seen people override that. I had a client once who said to me, I went back to church for the first time in several years. I'm like, how'd it go? And he said, well, I went into the restroom and vomited first thing, but then after that, it was okay. I'm like, no, 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 no. No, your body is telling you this is too much. It's too traumatic. Don't do it. But there were reasons that he overrode that. So anyway, so you got that. Don't override those things. Mostly listen to your body and your emotions. Don't overexpose yourself. And and get educated on religious abuse. Get educated. What does this look like when power is being misused by pastoral staff, by small group leaders, by elders, by what those in authority learn what that looks like when and how it feels. There may be some churches, this is subjective. There are some churches people could go to and say, oh, this is not an abusive church at all. And they're like feeling like I'm fine in this. There might be another person that says, ooh, there's too much control in this church. I got to get out. And honestly, I'm not going to say one is right or the other. You've got to figure that out for yourself. This is not working for me. And I think we have a hard time with that. We want a checklist, and those are good. Checklists are fine, but we want to objectively prove something is abusive. And I tell people, don't try. Like if it's hurting you, get out. So that's a quick, we could have a whole nother podcast on this about church reentry, because anyway, I'll leave it at that. Therapists, do they believe you? First of all, do they believe you? And are they subtly, that's a plus. What to watch for, are they subtly trying to push you toward a theology, a worldview, or church in their therapy? If they are, that's not good. Like you've already been told what to believe and how to believe it, and sometimes brainwashed. You do not, a therapist who pushes you toward believing in God or whatever. And there again, I'm still a person of faith, so I'm not, that's, but I don't push my clients because that's not my job and it can hurt them to do so. So you've got to be comfortable. Again, that's subjective. There might be a therapist who one person says, oh my gosh, they helped me so much. And another person said, no, they weren't that great for me. In fact, I didn't like how they handled it. That's okay. Find a therapist you trust and are comfortable. Don't trust them too soon. I always tell my clients, don't trust me too soon. Like, no, like that's your job to say, is what she's saying helping me and not hurting me?
I love all of that because it's teaching people to like be their own internal investigator almost,
Yes.
instead of
Yes.
relying, like you said, being codependent and being like, oh, I need to cater to everybody else's needs. It really makes you go inside and say, no, what do I need? I don't,
Yes.
I need to stop worrying about everybody else and like trying to fit in if it doesn't feel good and like listen to myself.
Yes. 100%, because most abuse survivors have had agency stripped from them. Stripped. And they have had their wants, their needs, their feelings have not mattered. They've learned that and they've decided it doesn't matter. And it is a long haul back to get people to say, here's what I want, here's what I need, here's how I feel. This is my experience and I'm standing by that. And that to me, when my clients can do that, I'm like, we're close to home. Yes. So yeah, and they needed to define that. That's not my job as their therapist to define what they want and need. That's theirs. So yeah, those are some. I could talk so long about a lot of these things, Emma.
I know we have to do some deep dives sometime. One of the things I think is very interesting is you seem to have had still a really strong connection to your faith despite all of this. Did you ever have moments where you didn't believe in God or you questioned God? And how did you overcome those sort
Oh,
of roller coasters and mountains that you were going up and down?
that's another hour. That's another hour podcast. Yes, huge. At the very beginning, I thought, am I going to stay alive or am I going to kill myself? Two, am I going to stick with God? Three, am I going to stick with the church? And I ended up saying yes to all of those. I also, 12 to 15 years after my abuse, started really pulling away from evangelicalism and started probably about 8 to 10 years of a painful deconstructing, painful pulling back and saying, what do I really believe? I still identify as a Christian in a very broad sense. I do not identify as evangelical anymore. I think there's still some beautiful things that happen in evangelicalism. I think there's some first of all, it benefited me. It formed the foundation of my life and my faith. So it'd be pretty silly to say it's all bad, because it's not. It's like I still draw from some of those ideas that are really important to me. But I have shifted in my view of the Bible, of my view of faith, my view of the nature of God, um, a lot through the years. And at this point, I'm happier spiritually and more connected with God than I ever have been. And so there's been a multi, and I'm summarizing 30 plus years right there in just a few sentences. So there's been a lot of tracking there of what do I believe, and what is my experience of God. And a lot of my past informs that, but there's been more. I think that's it. It's not even so much subtracting some of evangelicalisms, it's been broadening my view of God and how God moves in this world. So
That's amazing. You've been able to overcome that. It makes me so sad when people had a really strong faith and it was literally
yes,
just stripped from them because it was used so abusively against them by bad people, and
totally.
that can be such a huge journey to get somebody back. And some people don't ever make it to having,
No,
the same faith that they did, which is really sad. And
no. And I think God sees that and goes, yeah, why would you? The way I was represented, why would you want to believe in me? Like, and to me, I don't worry about that. I just trust God to take that person wherever they need to be in the time frame. That's not my job to push them in any way.
well, I know for sure we need to come back and have some deep dives on some of this stuff because that would be really fun. But
I
before we
love
do,
it, Emma. Yeah. You can
you're
tell
such
I
a
love talking about this stuff. So yes, that would be so fun.
Oh, you're such a wealth of knowledge. It's incredible getting to hear from so many decades worth of research and actual, firsthand personal experience and like then seeing you on the other side. I would never guess if I just met you that you had a troubled life. Like you're such a bright light and you're so just energetic, like your frequency is on such a high level. And I would never be like, oh, she grew up in an abusive home, so
Yeah.
you really do, like, that is so important that we give people hope and show people that, hey, this is possible. Like, you might not
Yeah.
see the light, but it's there. And if you can't find it, go look at somebody else's light, and follow them until your
Oh,
is lit.
all need somebody else's light at certain points. I have multiple times in my life, because this is one part of my story, but I got a, rough cancer story. There's been other personal traumas that, I've gone through. And this one was, I will say, definitely the most formative because I was 25. My brain was barely finished developing. Like it was truly a big deal. But I've had other stuff in life that, has kicked my butt. And yeah, and to be able to say, yes, there's still hope. There's hope for I don't want to overuse this word, but I do love the word redemption. There's hope to see something dark and evil and wrong and destructive be turned into something beautiful and good. So I think that's the nature, I think, of how God's made this world. Like we get to, we watch that and it does not discount the evil and the horror that's there. So
100%.
yeah.
And one part of your story too that I think is just incredible is not only did you like take all that time to heal, you went to school, you did decide to go public with your story and you discussed talking publicly. But one of the other things that you did, which I think is incredible, is you bared your soul in a book too. And I'd love for you to talk about this because this is something people don't have to travel to go hear this. They can order it and have it at home and learn. There's so much good information in here. I'd love for you to talk about the inspiration behind this book, share about it, and obviously where people can get it.
Totally. Well, this book has, as all books do, a story behind it. I started developing some curriculum. It's Traumatized by Religious Abuse. Yeah, Connie Baker. You can get it on Amazon. But I started in 2004, while I was still in school, developing curriculum for small groups for people who were going through religious abuse recovery. Yep, there it is, right there on Amazon. I started developing curriculum, and then I turned it into a seminar, a day and a half seminar. And that seminar happened in 2014, right after I was coming out of cancer. A lot of stuff got put on hold during the cancer years because I was kind of fighting for my life. And then in 2019, the book finally got published. So it had been in the works for about 15 years at that point, where I first started thinking through the ideas. So it has my story, but it also has framework, language for us to talk about what does abuse in a religious context look like, and how our ideas about God and the Bible leveraged to abuse people that sound really good. So that's, and it's in 4 parts, and the 4th part is how do you heal? And so I bring some major ideas that I work with my clients with about how they can heal. So.
And your book is just one thing that you do. You also have a YouTube channel. You have pages that people can follow. Let's talk about your career a little bit. And obviously, I'd love to have you on to talk more about this in a more deep dive also.
Sure.
But you do so much. Let's talk about what you do professionally now and like the beauty that you've turned out of all this pain.
Yeah, I'm doing a few things, and some of them aren't even public yet. I'm starting a greeting card line for survivors, which I'm super excited about. That'll hopefully come out here within the next months to hopefully 2024. It might be 2025. So we got a greeting card line for survivors called Dear Survivor. And actually you can get on. They're actually purchasable right now. We've got Dear Survivor. Well, yes, you can find those under, I think, shop. Nope. Resources. I may not have connected this yet. This is how new we are. Okay, let's talk about this top one here. This is another thing. I've made some card decks, morning inspiration and intention setting, decks of cards to go through. And this one is about faith, deconstruction, and reimagining. So this is for religious abuse survivors who have who have just had their lives blown up and who need a resource. These are the questions I ask my clients. And these are the things we explore. So it's a double card deck, and you can get that through question mapping, question-mapping.com. And you can also get them on my Connie A. Baker site, which is where we're at, started out here. So they're card decks. Anyway, so yes, these cards I think are super helpful for spiritual abuse survivors. As I say, I give out a letter with these card decks and say, not all these questions are going to apply to you, but some of them will. So.
I love that. And then you can, I'll go back. Your book is available here and it will take you to Amazon if you happen to be on Connie's website.
Oh, there's my course. Yes, my course on religious abuse recovery. I put a lot of time and effort. It's a really shockingly well done course. I had people tape me and they did it really professionally, and it's been really helpful for people.
And is this something where it's sort of like downloadable where they enroll and then it's a video course that they get, or how does this work?
It's a video course, yes. Mm-hmm.
Amazing. And you have resources on here also. You have videos. And another thing that you have a YouTube channel as well. Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk about that a little bit and sort of what
Sure. I've got YouTube. I post regularly on Instagram and Facebook. You can find me, Connie A. Baker. So yeah, YouTube gets stuff. Instagram and Facebook are my 2 main ones. I'm a bit on Pinterest as well. So any of those, you can, Connie A. Baker, religious abuse will almost always bring me up. So, and maybe I can even send some actual links to you, Emma, so you can put in the written part so they can connect.
Absolutely. I would love that. And like Connie said, she'll send those, and I have some up right now, her Facebook pages. She also has a private group also that you guys can request if you're a
Yes.
victim, from what I understand, or a survivor.
So right, absolutely. Overcoming religious abuse. Yeah.
That's so wonderful. There's not enough ways for people to get together who have had similar
Mhm.
experiences. I love that you've created a way that people can, if they've gone through something like what you did, they can join a group and have people that will accept them, and they can ask questions to you and vent. So please go check out that community. I'll have the link. I'm sure she does a vetting process. So there's a join group on Facebook. You guys can go ahead and join and answer the questions or prompt, however she does it. But I would highly recommend that. It can be very extremely isolating to go through a healing
Oh,
process after realizing what happened, and there's definitely sometimes it can be really hard in your personal life to find that community if you don't already have a solid grounding in church or family. Sometimes those things are part of the abuse and you have to leave them. So it's really nice to have ways that you can join with like-minded people who understand what you're going through, can help you with resources that maybe you don't have. And
mhm.
you get to interact with Connie, which is amazing, just because, again, you have somebody who's been there, done that in a sense, and has come out on the other side. And you guys can ask questions. And Connie, can people hire you if they're looking for a therapist? Are you taking clients right now?
Off and on. I'm pretty full most of the time, but my clients actually do get better here and there, and then, you know, slow down their process or leave. And if you are in Washington or Oregon, I'm licensed in those states. I don't see people outside of those states, but Washington and Oregon, I'm licensed in those states. And you can always just get in touch with me and say, hey, what's your wait list look like? That sort of thing. So,
Perfect. And they can do that right from your website, right? Where it says contact.
totally. Mhm.
Okay. That's amazing. Well, Connie, I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. You've done so much work for the community, for other people. On top of bearing your own story, you're taking on other people's stories, helping them through it, creating resources and ways to uplift people, making sure that there's ways that people have hope and can communicate with like-minded people. And I mean, I don't know how you do it all, groups and one-on-one sessions and being an author and doing a podcast and and then sitting here with people like me and doing other people's podcasts. I mean, you're still that go, go, go woman that you were so
Yeah.
long ago. And little Connie is so proud of the woman that you are today.
Mm,
And we're
mm.
all very proud of you. So I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking some time to come on here and share all your wisdom, your testimony, and all these amazing resources that you put so much time and effort into providing us so we can, hopefully accelerate our own healing process if we've gone
Yes.
through something like you.
Yes. To not have it take longer. It takes a long time. Healing just does. But it doesn't have to take as long as it took me because I just didn't have those resources. And that's where I feel very passionate about that. It's like, let's get the resources out there so people can continue to heal. So,
100%. And so
yeah.
for everybody listening, I will have Connie's information in the show notes. No matter what platform you're on, they light up as a hyperlink. So just go into the show notes, click, and it'll take you right to the website that you're looking to go to. And I encourage you guys to support survivors. So many of you are always asking, what can I do to help? One of the easiest, quickest ways is go buy a book, go take a course, go subscribe to their YouTube channel. There's a lot of risk too that comes with talking about some of this stuff. And I think there's less gaslighting, less retaliation at sometimes, less bullying when somebody goes to a YouTube channel and sees that they have a bunch of followers or that their book's a bestseller. They're like, oh, I'm not going to mess with this person. People have eyes on them. So we want to make sure that we're protecting survivors, that we're supporting them and resourcing them, that we're believing them and helping educate others. Take this book. This is a great book too. If whether you have a friend who's gone through it or somebody like me who hasn't, who wants to learn, this is also a really great educational tool, you guys. So I encourage you, if you have a friend that's starting to wake up to this stuff and saying, whoa, there's all these different abuses that exist in the world, I didn't know. Well, hey, here's a good 101 course where you can really dive in and learn about how this starts, where it's at in organizations and establishments, how it proliferates within groups and power structures. And I think a lot of the lessons in this book can be crossed over to corporations and anywhere where there's some type of a power structure. You can kind of take
Oh,
the model that Connie laid out, put it anywhere. It's not just if you're a church victim or survivor. This can really cross over to any type of
Yes.
career path or space that you've been abused. It's always a power issue if there's abuse.
Yes.
And so
Totally.
I'm going to have all of that in the show notes. And then Connie, is there anything else that you wanted to say before we wrap up?
Oh, it's just a delight being here. And I just think, for all the people listening, just wherever, I know there's going to be people in a vast spectrum of the journey, beginning, ending, just getting educated. And I just love the fact that they've stuck with us here for what, almost 2 hours, an hour and a half, just listening and being with us. And yeah, there's hope. That's the one thing I want to get out there. So,
And if anybody's an example of hope, it's you, Connie. So thank you
oh,
again for everything that you're doing. Thank you for all the work that you've put in to help us learn 30 years of knowledge and experience. That would take us 30 years to learn if we didn't have somebody like you sharing. So you guys, again, go connect with Connie. I'll have my links in the show notes as well. Would love to have your guys' support. These topics do get taboo. So support us wherever you can, just in case something gets terminated or taken off. And thank you guys for supporting survivors and for the guests. I encourage you guys to please go buy this book too. It's amazing. And I'll have the link in the show notes for you guys. So thank you, Connie, for being here. Thank you guys
so
for
welcome. Thank you. I love the work you're doing, Emma. It warms my heart. So yes, keep up the good work.
same sister. And we can't wait to have you back. And so
All
you
right.
guys, thank you so much for listening. God bless you. And we will see you next time.